Well, welcome everybody. My name is Quentin Palfrey. I'm the chair of the Voter Protection Corps. We're thrilled to have you here today. We've got a great discussion for you. Um, this is my sixth presidential cycle working on voter protection issues. And in 2019, a group of us formed the Voter Protection Corps, which exists as both a 501c3 and a 501c4 organization. This event is hosted by the 501c3. We are an organization that is focused on ensuring that every eligible voter can register, vote, and have their vote count. We were set up as an organization that was meant to focus on some of the year-round challenges that come up in protecting our democracy. One of the things that we learned over a series of cycles was that the Voter Protection Committee tended to come together for a few months right before a general election campaign, recruit, train, and deploy thousands or tens of thousands of voter protection volunteers. And then often right after the end of a presidential election cycle, a fair amount of that infrastructure would go away. We wanted to have a year-round effort that allowed us to learn from the challenges that were faced in one cycle and start to intervene and support efforts to promote democracy on a year-round basis. So we ran some programming both in 2020 and in 2024 to try to take on the challenges that we saw in those cycles. And we can spend a little bit of time talking about what we learned, being a former vice president of Common Cause. So what I'd love to do is turn it over briefly to Ella Cam to lay out some of how this can go, and then I will turn it over to Caroline.
Hi, folks. Yeah. So once again, welcome and thank you for joining. As we begin, just going to set a few ground rules for the chat. First of all, we're going to be civil, and then we're also going to stay on topic. But the chat and the Q&A function are how you're going to ask questions to our speakers. So send them to me. I'm going to compile them, and then Quentin and I will ask those questions during our discussion time.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I'd love to turn it over to Caroline Hutton to give some reflections on some of the work that she's done recently in Wisconsin.
Sure. Thank you so much, Quentin. Jency, Quentin, Ella, can one of you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me all right? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone who's here. I've been skimming through the attendees list, and this is a really, really phenomenal group of activists and staff and volunteers. So I'm grateful for you all spending a bit of your Tuesday afternoon, evening with us and hearing from my amazing fellow panelists as well. So my name is Caroline Hutton. I am the Voter Protection Director at the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. I'm based in Madison, Wisconsin, born and raised in the Midwest, and all my family is from a town called Fond du Lac here in Wisconsin. I started with Wisdom's Vote Pro in 2021. So my origin is actually as a hotline volunteer in the 2020 elections, working with a lot of the volunteers I still work with today. And the way that I describe what voter protection does on a campaign and the role that it functions is there are a bunch of other departments working tirelessly to persuade and mobilize voters to vote for Democrats in our case. And inevitably, because of the way the system is designed, some of those voters are going to hit a barrier. That's the facts, right? And that's where our team comes in. We come in to equip those voters with the information and the support that they need to empower them to cast their ballot and have it counted. So tonight, I will run through briefly some of the programs that we ran in the 2024 election. Some things that I think using the big picture we did that made a difference in the long run, and some challenges that we faced. I'll close by talking through what we can expect for 2025, and of course, an ask for you as well. So in 2024, my team really focused on running the fundamentals of a good voter protection program really, really well, right? So that looks like a robust poll observer program during early vote election day at central counting facilities. It looks like running a voter assistance hotline staffed by volunteers who are well trained on Wisconsin election law and ready to answer voters' questions. It looks like a ballot care program where we're reaching out proactively to voters whose absentee ballots are at risk of rejection, often due to a clerical error, to make sure that they have the information they need to remedy the error and have that ballot counted. We're also responsible for the organization's voter education efforts. So proactively reaching out to voters who might need to update their registration, keeping our online voting guide up to date, and also collecting early vote information for hundreds, if not thousands, of municipalities across the state so that every voter knows how to vote early or access a drop box. Of course, we also handle the organization's election administration monitoring related activities. So keeping an eye on litigation and legislation that impacts voting rights, liaising with election officials and municipal clerks, as well as preparing for any sort of post-election scenarios, which this year came in handy given that our U.S. Senate race was just barely within a recount margin. Starting with some of the sort of proactive efforts and big pictures lessons learned that I took away from this cycle. First and foremost, I think my program's work and what I saw happen in Wisconsin this year was truly a testament to how much it pays to have year-round voter protection. We've been really lucky to have a year-round voter protection program in Wisconsin since 2020, and that's something the state party has really invested in. And it has allowed us a much longer runway for relationship building with local election officials. It has made sure that we can preserve that institutional knowledge, keep volunteers engaged cycle after cycle, and use primaries and local elections as a sort of testing ground to keep volunteers engaged, refine our processes, things like that. So I really saw I cannot emphasize enough how much a difference it makes to have that year-round investment in programs like this. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here to a degree, but was really a takeaway for me. I think we also saw how important it is to have pro-democracy, pro-voter, and values-aligned public servants at the absolute most local levels of government, right? For example, in Wisconsin, elections are administered at the municipal level, which means that municipal clerks and city councils and mayors are the ones deciding whether or not to approve an additional early vote site or whether or not to provide additional funding from the city budget for supplies that the clerks might need. And it was a direct result of city councils we were able to flip in 2023 and 2024 that made it such that clerks had more resources than they may have otherwise had. We also, I think, saw what an importance, and I'll talk more about our Supreme Court race in a moment, but what a difference it made that we had our state's highest court be one that was pro-voter, pro-democracy, and we weren't getting anti-voter decisions out of our highest court every week, or close to it at least, it felt. And last but not least, I think we saw what a difference it makes when you're able to use some of this off-year time to invest in nominating poll workers, working with election administrators to make sure that they're preparing and that they have what they need, and seeing how the party can be helpful in that effort. In terms of some challenges that we saw, I think first we saw in 2024, massive volume of early vote turnout and particularly same-day registration, especially on college campuses. That led to some technological difficulties, the state's election database essentially going down due to lack of server capacity, printers conking out, things like that, which was a persistent issue statewide. And I think it's something that we need to be thinking proactively about how those systems could be better designed to make sure that if, next time we have a massive turnout, our systems and technology can handle it. We also saw poll worker shortages, threats to election officials, and still the high turnover that we've been seeing since the Big Lie era has kind of taken foot. And last but not least, I think this one is a bit more complicated and maybe worth going offline a bit about more, but in Wisconsin, at least, a lot of the doomsday scenarios that we were preparing for, be it mass challenges, delayed certification, ultimately didn't come to pass, in large part because we lost, frankly. But I think it's something we're thinking through how we prepare for those situations. And I know Cecilia had a different experience there, and I think we'll be able to speak to some of those situations a bit better. I'm coming up on time. So just looking ahead a bit, um, in Wisconsin, our next big fight is electing Judge Susan Crawford to our state Supreme Court on April 1st. We, as I mentioned, flipped our Supreme Court to a liberal majority in spring of 2023. And if we win this race, we will have a liberal majority on the court until 2028. This is crucial in the fight for voting rights and for being a stopgap to preserve democracy in the Badger State. It has amazing implications for fair maps, for voting rights, for abortion rights, and so much more. As a lot of you probably have seen in the past couple of weeks, groups backed by Elon Musk have started pouring millions into our opponent. And this is really the first major electoral fight of the Trump era. So if you're interested in getting involved with Wisdems voter protection, feel free to, I'll put it in the chat, but go to wisdems.org/VotePro events to get signed up. We would love to see folks there to whatever extent some of us can collaborate, I know. And last but not least, I think just in our own states, continuing to advocate for year-round voter protection programming and continuing to be responsive to changes in electoral patterns that we're seeing in the states. A return to in-person voting, return to maybe insurge and early voting, things like that, making sure our programming is responsive to the voters in our states and really supports them in the methods of voting that they choose and are most convenient for them. So I know I'm over time a little bit, so I will gladly turn it back to Quentin. But again, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be amongst the script tonight.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And I just want to underscore a couple of things that Caroline said. The first is the importance of year-round voter protection efforts. One of the things that we've found cycle after cycle is that so many of the challenges that are most impactful to voters are just not solvable in the election day or the run-up to election day. And the best voter protection programs are the ones that take note of the challenges that voters face and then spend some of the time between elections working to solve those challenges, deploying a series of strategies to try to make sure that the next cycle, we don't run into the same challenge, and also sort of predicting some of the problems that came up. There's also a very robust, nonpartisan voter protection ecosystem. And I wanted to turn the mic over to Jenny Guzman, who is a program director for Common Cause Arizona, both to give us a little bit of perspective on Arizona and also a little bit of perspective on the 501c3 sort of nonpartisan voter protection efforts and leadership that exists in that space. Jenny?
Yeah, thank you so much, Quentin. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Jenny Guzman. I use she, her, ella. I am the program director for Common Cause Arizona. So I'm coming into this space through a different lens. I'm going to be covering the 501c3 nonpartisan side of things, how we do election protection, and also just really want to emphasize that we are nonpartisan at Common Cause Arizona, and the work that I do, regardless of who the voter is 100% nonpartisan. So really just want to echo that as I go into what I'm going to be talking about. But this past cycle, I helped co-lead the Arizona Election Protection Coalition. So that was a really big lift, right? When we're talking about what election protection entails, what voter protection entails, all of these big conversation buckets. When we think about all of the states that have been targeted when it comes to election protection, disinfo, a little bit of everything, Arizona's always on the spotlight when it comes to these matters. So being in Arizona, being a leader in Arizona, and also having that Arizona background is really integral when it comes to the work that we're building out in the coalition that we're developing to ensure that all voters across the state are able to get everything they need to be able to safe and securely cast their ballot. I'm sure you've all heard a million different things about quote unquote the printers in Maricopa, bomb threats in Apache, and more. And while things like that do occur, it doesn't mean that the voting experience in Arizona isn't safe and secure. So that's also one of the big things that I really want to emphasize going into this is that Arizona's experience is really different than I would say what is sensationalized in the news or even what is covered a lot of the times in different states. So it's also just really important to remember that although Arizona does have a lot of eyes on it, it is a state that runs elections very efficiently. We have a very robust vote by mail program. The majority, over 80% of Arizona voters vote by mail. However, not all Arizona voters are able to vote by mail due to tribal and rural challenges. So because of that all, it's really important to ensure that we're offering the support that voters need to be able to cast their ballot no matter where in the state they are. So a little bit about our program. We were in 9 counties across the state. We have 15, so very different to other states. But what made Arizona's program really unique is that the majority of our program, besides being in Maricopa County, which you've all heard of, and also Pima, which houses Tucson, is that we were able to be present in rural Arizona. So what that meant is that we were able to capture voters that otherwise maybe wouldn't have the support that they needed and also face different and unique challenges that voters in Maricopa and Pima don't always face. So meeting voters where they're at has been a really integral and important part to our mission and our work in Election Protection Arizona, because otherwise you are leaving out a huge bucket of voters that do face challenges that aren't always contacted and don't get service the same way as other groups do. So when we were going into developing the program, that's something I'm really passionate about. If you've been in a space with me, you've likely heard me say a million trillion times. I'll always repeat it. I'm from Yuma. I'm from a border town. I'm from rural Arizona. So for me, I know what it's like to not be serviced correctly. I know what it's like to not have the presence of some of these other different counties that they have when it comes to a lot of attention. But it also means that we face different and unique challenges. So being able to provide that expert support is one of the most important things with our election protection program. And as we're going into this 2025 cycle, I'll touch a little bit as to what we were able to accomplish in 2024. But as we go into 2025, I think the really important key here is to ensure that we're being consistent. So consistent with election protection, making sure that we're running and developing a program that doesn't just come around whenever it's necessary or important, or quote unquote necessary or important, but really a program that reaches voters and is being intentional about reaching voters, even when maybe the stakes are lower, whatever that may look like, being there for the municipal races. Because again, we're now in a position where there are new people that are running elections that haven't run elections before, or maybe there's been a lot of switching out for election administrators, or maybe different elected officials, different policies that have passed. So these are the years where things are being tested. And if something is going wrong, if something is going to be difficult, these are the years that it's really integral and important to ensure that we're making sure that everything is being addressed, everything is running smoothly. And if it's not, we're able to develop a plan to be able to address it, to make sure that every voter, regardless of their socioeconomic background, regardless of who they're voting for, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they live, they're able to cast their ballot without any barriers at all. But again, right, when it comes to these off years, it's really also important to remember that these are often the years where new things are implemented, where new things are being tested. So being able to be present and consistent during this time allows us to be able to create a program that's even stronger during some of the bigger election years or midterms to make sure that everything is running smoothly and or as smooth as possible, right? So that's a big piece of what I, am covering and also just hoping to be targeting this year in 2025. But also as I think about everything is making sure that, again, as we were able to run a successful program in rural Arizona in 2024, we're also able to carry that into 2025. And also remembering that maybe these are the years that things get tougher. These are the years that things are getting tested more. But also ensuring that we're also utilizing this time to continue developing and creating relationships with the tribal and rural leaders that already exist there. There are tribal and rural leaders across all of our states that have already been doing countless years of work that we need to make sure that we're working with, we're learning from, and we're giving them the resources that they need to be able to connect with their communities and make sure that we're coordinating with them directly. I was really proud of the way that in Arizona we were able to coordinate with rural organizations and also Native Vote. Our Election Protection Coalition coordinates directly with Native Vote Arizona. So all of us together, we were able to provide a robust program that offered these services to everybody, every voter. And that was really important to us and also something that we try to live our values by, right? Especially being in a nonpartisan space, it's really important for us to ensure that we're not targeting any one specific type of voter, that we're not singling out any one specific type of voter, but really ensuring that every type of voter that needs to be serviced is getting what they need to be able to cast their ballot and be able to be successful. So I'm happy to talk more about some of the technological challenges and everything else that we faced in Arizona. But really, I can't emphasize enough that even though you may have heard things about bomb threats, heard things about issues with polling machines, our groups were there to be able to be supportive. And also, a lot of what was dealt with, was not actually harmful, didn't end up having any effect. So that's also really just a great thing to uplift and amplify, especially as we give credit to election administrators that have been doing this work for a long time and the election administrators that continue to do this work regardless of all of the prejudice and difficult situations that they've been put under, but also ensuring that they're doing everything they can to be able to run elections as smoothly as possible. So it's a really unique dynamic in Arizona, but nonetheless, really just want to emphasize and really remind folks that despite all the scandal, despite all the media noise, things are going great in Arizona, but we're also being really diligent and aware about everything that's happening and all of the changes that could come. So we're being aware and on top of it all. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thanks for your leadership. I had a chance to spend the end of the election cycle in Arizona, and it's a really special place. And as we pulled together this program, we wanted to have some leaders here who could speak directly to the experiences in some of these really important battleground states like Arizona, like Georgia, like Wisconsin. But one of the other aspects of voter protection that we've been focusing on a lot has been some of the ways in which the digital landscape has changed the experience for voters and some of the threats to our democracy. And one of the smartest people that I've come across in thinking about how to respond to these changes to this environment has been Jesse Littlewood, who worked with us in Voter Protection Corps in the last cycle and is leading some of our efforts going forward. And so I wanted to give Jesse a few minutes to talk a little bit about the digital landscape for voter protection in 2024 and leading into 2025. Jesse?
Thank you, Quentin. And thanks, everyone. This was actually very inspiring to hear about the success and a very positive point of view of how to do voter protection moving forward. I won't be covering a specific geographic area, but instead the sort of digital social media realm. And I am warning folks that I do not have as sunny of an outlook as I believe some of the other speakers tonight have. And I think we are in for tough sledding and some significant challenges. Coming with solutions to those challenges starts with addressing them head on. So I come into this work from having spent 2020 and 2022 leading the election protections counter disinformation strategy, which is the largest nationwide nonpartisan voter protection counter disinformation and counter election disinformation strategy. And have helped continue to build some of that work in 2024 with Voter Protection Corps, where we worked with state-based groups to deliver some best-in-class, I think, training and support on how to counter the threats. Like many, I was certainly worried that there would be significant challenges in 2024 with generative AI content. So what experts call synthetic media, with impersonating politicians, celebrities, and VIPs, that this kind of content would flood the information ecosystem and deceive voters into staying home, missing their opportunity to vote, or casting a vote after a candidate or a piece of content duped them into voting someone that they wouldn't otherwise do based off of a deep fake or misuse of someone's likeness. And in some ways, I think 2024 is the AI election that wasn't. And we were particularly, I think, focused on this threat in the event of a contested election where deception and the synthetic media might be used in an attempt to overturn the results. To that extent, we were only sort of half right. There were some examples of deepfakes and other deception, but the examples of those did not gain widespread traction and really don't appear to be the tipping point of the election. That said, what I think people in the academic realm called information disorder, the kind of umbrella term that covers misinformation and disinformation, it did play a significant role in the 2024 election. But the synthetic media, the generative AI content, instead of being used to appear as real content and to deceive people, it was more used as part of a souped up negative campaigning attack strategy and a promotional strategy, particularly utilized by President Trump's re-election campaign. Most of the manipulated media or synthetic content were like memes or oddly compelling, but clearly AI generated images and videos. And they were used for persuasion, recruitment, and influence of voters. In particular, I think were successful because they attacked and demonized their political opponents. So Vice President Harris and Democrats more broadly. So it was more of a technological evolution of negative campaigning than the deep fake sort of apocalypse that many folks, and myself included, were certainly worried about. The challenge that I see is that somewhat overshadowed the background noise of lies and lies about the electoral process that came with it in 2024 with a distinctly political and partisan twinge. So lies about immigration policy were tied to lies about or false conspiracy theories about non-citizens voting, using some of these really deeply rooted narratives that our electoral process is somehow rigged, that have been present ever since 2016. That puts nonpartisan election reform groups in a really deeply challenged position. And I want to spend the rest of my minute or two talking about, I think, some of the challenges that we'll be facing to bring them to light and to help maybe over the rest of this call figure out some pathways forward. From a nonpartisan election reform or election protection groups, we've oftentimes attempted to separate lies and conspiracy theories about the electoral process from the more partisan political content, in the hopes that our nonpartisan status would give us standing and not be seen as in the take for any one party or another, insisting that voting rights and voter protection is not some partisan activity. And in 2025, everything is deeply politicized. And I believe that nonpartisan voter protection efforts will never be given any benefit or support if it serves a political purpose to attack them. So we are in for some challenges, and we cannot fight the last war. Already, we have seen social media platforms show that they will no longer even try and fact check or moderate damaging false information to their platforms. We should, in fact, probably expect the opposite, that social media really should be viewed as a highly politicized space that is fundamentally right now controlled by right-wing, authoritarian, and anti-democratic forces. Smaller online communities may be able to buck the trend, but probably only until they become influential enough to be colonized. So that's not exactly an uplifting thought. And I don't have many clear answers on how to fight this next war, but I do think there are some significant forces and 4 kind of key points that I'd want to put on the table. So first is the wrong lesson from 2024 is to believe that there is no AI threat to our elections because deepfakes didn't sway this one. I think that door remains widely open. In particular, in a contested election, we may see this kind of information warfare take place. The second is we should not and cannot expect the federal government will raise a robust defense against information threats and digital security. CISA, the key agency for cybersecurity, has been ordered to stop all election security activities. If it returns, I think we should expect it to be a more politicized mission and staff. And we may see a situation where federal agencies and states are at odds with each other responding to election disinformation. I think third, nonpartisan voter protection groups will be deeply challenged to stay above the fray. So for years, we've been promoting trusted voices, elections officials, government agencies, and mainstream media, equally endorsing state leaders and federal agencies, and never endorsing or promoting information coming from a partisan or a party source. That may need to change if the federal agencies can no longer be trusted to provide accurate information or politicize state leaders and election administrators. There may need to be a new rubric to identify who is a trusted source of information and who is not. Just having a .gov email address may not qualify you. And fourth, I think the biggest challenge is cutting through the information ecosystem to provide accurate information. Retooling our social media programs alone won't get us there. Finding different touch points to reach people offline through community or human connections, through mainstream culture, I think those are going to become more important. Taking our messages through social media is not impossible, but we need to have a almost guerrilla warfare insurgent mindset because we are not playing on a level playing field. And there is no line that anti-democratic forces are willing to cross when it comes to lies, deceit, and information warfare. So voter protection is downstream from voter information, which is downstream from culture, media, and politics. It's the challenge of folks on this call and our community of pro-democracy forces to throw out the old playbooks that allowed us to rely on a generally stable elections process and predictable information environment. I think the old maps don't work anymore, and it's going to take some risks and some new approaches by everyone here to move forward in protecting our democracy. So I leave that as a challenge for this group of thinkers and practitioners.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and thanks to all of you for those sort of opening comments. So I want to do a couple of things now. First, I want to invite the folks in the room to put any questions that you have into the chat. My colleague Ella will start looking through those and preparing some questions for the panelists. In the meantime, I'm going to get things started with a few questions for folks to chew on. I also want to highlight a couple of things coming up. So first, the Voter Protection Corps on April 15th will have another conversation. This time, it will be a little bit more concretely focused on the 2025 election cycle, Virginia, but also New Jersey and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania upcoming elections. So give you some opportunities to directly engage with the folks who are thinking about the elections in 2025. And also I wanted to flag for you that we'd love for you to get engaged with the Voter Protection Corps. This is meant to be a community and a network of voter protection experts and people who care about democracy year round. And so we will put in the chat ways for you to engage with this group going forward. But I want to pose the first question, sort of moderator's privilege to the panel. And I want to build on something that Jesse spoke about, which is there is always the peril of fighting the last war. And I think that it's really important that we learn from the past cycle. And one of the reasons why we spent so much time here today talking about, your experiences in Arizona and Wisconsin and Georgia in the last cycle is that we do need to learn from what happened. At the same time, the landscape is changing very, very rapidly. We have a president who doesn't believe in democratic institutions, and that is likely to filter its way into the experience that voters have in 2025, 2026 with registering, voting, and having their vote count. So I wanted to do sort of a rapid round across the panel to sort of ask, what are you worried about in 2025 and 2026? How is this going to change? And how should we be preparing? And maybe I'll go in the same order that we started with. So I'll turn it to you, Caroline, first, and then rapid fire to Cecilia, Jenny, and Jesse. And in the meantime, invite folks to put other questions into the chat. And Ella will take a look at those and pull them out as future questions. But Caroline, what are you worried about for 2025? How is this going to be different, and how can we prepare?
Certainly. This might sound like I'm taking the easy way out, but I really keep going back to this Supreme Court race that we have on April 1st. I think what we're seeing play out right now in North Carolina, for example, and the back and forth over their state Supreme Court seat just shows that these races and these types of races are not, and these types of positions are not ones that the other side are taking for granted. In Wisconsin in particular, I've been around now for a handful of Supreme Court races. The progressives have won the last couple by 10, 11 points. But we had races in 2019 on our Supreme Court where we lost by a hair, that were much closer. And in 2017, where the conservative back candidate ran unopposed. So it is clear that the Republicans and the conservative side are taking this one a lot more seriously. They're pouring more money into it. I don't think this one will be a landslide in the way that we've seen in 2020 and 2023 for our state Supreme Court. So And we can see seems to be Elon Musk's next target electorally. So I think taking this race really seriously, um, and just understanding the long-term implications that losing that court majority could have for voting rights and access to vote by mail, access to drop boxes, access to so many other sort of cornerstone pieces of our electoral system. So I really think that is what I'm most, I wouldn't say fearful of, but taking most seriously and preparing for is making sure we win this seat.
I'm going to come back to that one because I definitely want each of you to give a little bit of guidance to folks on how they can be actively engaged. And I hope one of those ways is for folks to get involved with the Voter Protection Corps and some of our efforts. But Jenny, what are you worrying about in 2025, 2026?
Yeah, I would say something that's constant for me is the turnover of election administrators and election workers. That's also something that's just really important to ensure that, there's people that are going to be able to run these elections, and making sure that there's not a shortage of staff. So that's number one. And number two are any of the policies that we're seeing plague a lot of our states. In Arizona, we're dealing with documentary proof of citizenship. So that's also something that we're tackling, and any legislative issues that may come up.
That's great. And Jesse, I know you gave us a preview of some of your concerns, but what's keeping you up at night?
I think defending institutions is particularly hard in this moment of deep-seated dissatisfaction of institutions. And until we find a new way of identifying what democracy is against, not just what we're for, I think we will struggle to capture attention and the political power that is needed to keep democracy as strong as it has been recently.
That's terrific. Well, I'm going to invite you into the chat. I'm seeing some of the questions come from the chat, but wonder if you could pull one or two of them forward and pose them for our engagement.
Yeah. So one question I have is coming from Jennifer. It's, how do we counter those who have literally billions of dollars to throw into elections to get their messages out and overwhelm the truth? Is it messaging everywhere, everything all at once? And then kind of they added on to that, what kinds of in-person protests or actions in support of democracy are most effective?
Caroline, that seems focused on your current work, perhaps.
There's perhaps a billionaire on the other side of this one pouring in. Yes, unlimited money. That's a great question, Jennifer. And I appreciate to Cecilia's point. I think this is absolutely the time to stay engaged and sort of stay at the forefront of that fight. My best answer is going to be, we should focus on the things that are within our control, and the things that we can do either locally within our own communities or in, a neighboring state that we care about, whether that's going to be a poll observer in Wisconsin in April, whether that is reaching out to your friends in a battleground state that have, big elections or off-year elections that might be important. Just making sure that you can find small ways in which you can resist and you can be a part of it. I am not a billionaire. I don't want to assume things, but you probably aren't either, given the way you posed that question. And I think it's more so about, we might not be able to, respond in kind and pour millions into a race, but we can use our time and our energy to control the things that are within our control, which is making sure that every voter we encounter leaves a conversation with us feeling empowered and equipped to cast their ballot effectively and make sure their friends do the same. So sounds like a kind of hokey answer, but I think shrinking the change and focusing on what's in our control is really important.
Jenny, do you have thoughts on ways people can help?
I think it's, there's definitely different ways and avenues from a nonpartisan side. I think just continuing to be consistent in educating yourself on what's fact and what isn't is going to be really key, because as this money pours in, there's also going to be a lot of mis and disinformation that is also going to be getting poured into all of our feeds, into all of our ecosystems, whatever it may look like. But also trying to engage with other people in your community to make sure that they have the resources and facts that they need to be able to be well informed and be able to cast their decision ultimately at the end of the day, or even outside of voting, right? Just ensuring that they know what actually is happening in the world versus what's not true.
That's a good segue to Jesse Littlewood. Do you have some thoughts on best practices, what you can do online, what is counterproductive to do online, what people should know about information, the information environment?
Yeah, I would like to co-sign some comments in the chat. Stanley and Holden I think make some great points. I think building a network of trusted folks that you yourself are involved in that isn't mediated by some social media platform is a good idea. I think building those human connections are very important. There's also, I think, some best practices in terms of don't amplify disinformation when you see it. It's very tempting, but it does not help. But do try and have conversations or engagement that takes people out of that kind of realm, or feeling like they using a more Socratic method can sometimes help people unlock themselves from the disinformation that they have sort of been led down to believe, as opposed to triggering people's confirmation bias by telling them they have it all wrong and you have the answers instead. So I think our solutions have to look pretty different than the problems. And it's going to need some creativity and experimentation to get us there. So if you come up with great ideas for folks on this call, we would love to hear them as well.
Yeah, and if folks haven't seen them, the Voter Protection Corps created some great toolkits. We brought together some experts on AI, some experts on misinformation, disinformation, voter protections response. And we have some pretty accessible video toolkits and written toolkits that you can share with folks to help train folks on what works, what doesn't, what's practically useful online. I want to be respectful of folks' time and try and wrap up as close to an hour as possible. But what I'd love to do is give each of our panelists an opportunity for a last word, a concluding thought, and something to leave us all with. So maybe we'll start with you, Caroline.
Yes, my computer just froze, but I think I'm back. Okay, excellent. No, I just want to say thank you all for having us. And I'm really bolstered by the number of people on this Zoom tonight and all the people who want to lend their time to protecting and supporting voters in 2025 and beyond. So I'll put the links if you're interested in getting involved in the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin in the chat. I'll dump those once more. But really and truly, I think my advice holds true. Shrinking the change, focusing on your own community and how you can support voters in way amongst your friends and your neighbors is so important. And I'm just grateful that so many people are interested in continuing to do it. So that's all I got.
Thank you so much. Just want to say thank you everybody for joining. Also, just more than happy to talk more about Arizona engagement offline if possible, if needed. I put my email in the chat. I'll put it back again. And if you're in Arizona or interested in supporting any of the Arizona election protection efforts, you can go to protectthevote.net and I'll be there to help you out. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Jesse?
We're obviously living through a time of pretty significant disruption within the context of many aspects of society, but also our voting and election system. And that means it's also a chance to build something new and better, and possibly bring in ideas that haven't yet made sense, but now is the time. So I would encourage people to stay connected and be engaged in person with people who are part of your community and to be grounded, and then start to think about and express what we want to build as a democracy. We will have an opportunity as we get through these dark times to bring something new into the world.
Thank you so much. This was a terrific discussion. Really appreciate all of the work that all of you are doing, and would love to continue to work with you to protect voters and protect our democracy. Thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate your time.